The Christian tradition of Easter is nestled in Germanic roots, specifically referring to the eastern direction from which the sun rises. Bede, a British monk who lived in the late 7th and early 8th century, wrote that the month in which English Christians were celebrating the resurrection of Jesus had been called Easter Monath in Old English, referring to a goddess named Istra or Ustra. And even though Christians had begun affirming the meaning of this celebration, they continued to use the name of the goddess to designate the season. Although Easter and Ostara do not occur at the same time, they are inextricably linked, etched in history, played out before our eyes each year in the modern world. This morning, I am proud to honor all beliefs with a recognition of the origins of the holiday, as well as a realization that ultimately both Easter and Ostara symbolize spring. The rebirth played out before our eyes as Mother Earth blossoms, bringing forth new life as the cold gives way to the warmth. As a point of equilibrium, if you will, in the wheel of the year. I have been looking forward to Matt's sermon this week as it is teeming with the experiences of the Unitarian Universalist Youth Ministry. Each new thought and idea introduced by UU youths offers a new possibility of growth to our beautiful living tradition. Such new growth is a cornerstone of Unitarian Universalism and reminds me of the new life that is the essence of spring herself. And so, this fine Easter morning, I am most honored to introduce Matthew Pargeter-Villarreal. Welcome back, Matt. The virtual pulpit is yours.
Thank you, Teresa, and happy Easter, everyone. I think that you should take over the youth group. This was a suggestion that was presented to me by the senior minister when I was serving as intern minister at the Welcome Table Christian Church while I was completing my year of supervised ministry in seminary. While my official response to the suggestion was that I would be happy to take over leading the youth group, I am sure that the initial displeasure could clearly be read across my face. In the great hierarchy of congregational ministry that had been formulated solely in my mind, youth group leader was admittedly third from the bottom on my list, only slightly above children's RE teacher and serving on the finance committee. No offense to children's RE teachers or finance committee members. The vast majority of my colleagues in seminary were all about children's and youth ministry, so much so that they had already declared upon arriving at seminary this was the type of ministry that they were looking to pursue. Not that I was against leading the youth group, I honestly didn't mind. They simply did not see it as me. It was not something that I was enthusiastically called to like my fellow seminarians, and honestly, at the time, I didn't understand what the hype was. But as the intern, I was eager to learn, so I decided to open up my mind and approach the unknown the way that I always do, by diving in head first and figuring out all the rest later after the dust had cleared. I would have loved to be a fly on the wall to my interactions and encounters with my first youth group. Thankfully, it was a small group. There were 6 youth at the most, 4 of whom were the minister's kids, who I got along with pretty well anyway. Still, I had never taught RE before, and I was painfully aware of the fact that me as a UU was now responsible for basically teaching Sunday school at a mainstream Christian church. Even though I had grown up in the Anglican church, we did not have Sunday school. The only sort of religious education that I had ever been exposed to was catechism instruction in preparation for confirmation and vacation Bible school. And I was definitely certain that I was not about to do or model either one of those. So I reached out to the minister for any kind of guidance, or at least to be pointed in the right direction. The response that he gave me is a statement that has stuck with me ever since. and one which started my conversion to the importance of youth religious education. He said, and I quote, "Nobody has done anything with the youth group in a very long time. Just find something to do with them." Ever since I was young, I had been one of those weird kids that was always excited to go to church. Regardless of the fact that this was a clear sign that I was going to be a minister later in life, I always looked forward to the service and the minister's message, whether or not I was interested or bored by it, and to meeting and socializing with other people at coffee hour afterwards. I could not imagine the feeling of waking up on a Sunday morning, getting dressed up, and going to church, only to be relegated to a classroom and ignored, no matter how many comfy couches and ping pong tables had been put in there. I had also been a teenager before. I knew that no matter how much you may want to be left alone, listening to music and playing games on your phone, the feeling of loneliness and isolation only intensifies. It was in that moment and in that statement that I knew exactly what I was going to do with the youth group. I marched back into the youth room and sat my youth group down on the very comfortable couches, and I had a conversation with them. I told them that as many ideas as I may have about what we should do in youth group, this was their space and their time to get to be themselves. Whatever it was they wanted to do and what they wanted to talk about was welcome. Nothing was going to be off the table. Less than a week after we had that conversation, a 19-year-old with a semi-automatic rifle walked into Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, and killed 17 people and wounded 17 others. It was, and still is, the deadliest school shooting in US history. For days afterward, the kids in my youth group, who were now connected through social media in a way that my generation had not been, told me about being subjected to a 24-hour media onslaught that relived every single moment and emotion of the ordeal. And this was not coming from mainstream news media. This was coming from the reposted and retweeted accounts of youth at Stoneman Douglas High School who had experienced it and lived through it, many of whom were the same age and just like those in my youth group. My youth group was angry. They were frustrated that nothing was being done and that no one in power seemed to be doing anything to make sure that this did not happen again. They saw how the adults that they were supposed to be looking up to were quick to label them as kids who didn't know better or understand how the world works when they shared their truth and their fears. They told me all about the March for Our Lives that followed, how they joined with their friends and other students in walking out of class and joining marches and protests in their area. What I learned from my youth group is that they were a generation that was no longer going to be content with a moment going by in history and being told that there was nothing that they could do about it. I learned that they were going to use all of the resources at their disposal to find a way to try and do something. And if they did not have the resources at their disposal, they were going to find a way to breathe those resources into existence and create them, not only for themselves, but future generations that should not have to experience the same tragedies that they did. As someone who has watched his generation become more numb and resigned to tragedy after tragedy, I found myself learning more from them and taking more inspiration from them than any that I was imparting onto them. I encountered a similar group of youth when I served as chaplain for the Reed Camp, a summer program for UU high school students held at URU Camp and Retreat Center in Mountain Home, Texas. I still was not entirely sure of how I felt about being a youth group leader, but inspired and nourished by my experience with the youth group at the welcome table, I was more than happy to dive in and be a part of the camp experience for these youth in any way that I could. The first night that I was there, seated around their campfire for their first all-camp meeting, I watched these UU high schoolers, many of whom were from different congregations in different cities and different states and had never met each other, as their first order of business, put together a complete and comprehensive camp covenant in the span of 20 minutes. And once they had put it together, they lived and modeled it for the entire rest of the week, with very little need for reminders. The amazing part was not the fact that they managed to do something that I have seen UU adults who have been on a long list of committees take several weeks to do, but the way that they went about doing it. The question that kept going around the circle as the youth invited each other to share their concerns that struck me was, would having this in writing in the covenant be what you need to feel safe? Would having this in writing in the covenant be what you need to feel safe? It did not matter that not everyone in the circle knew each other. By virtue of the fact that they were there and that they were present, there was no doubt in the minds of any of the youth that each one of them was important and each one of them deserved to be cared for. It was incredible to see how completely authentic and organic it was. And I could not help but think of how desperately these youth needed to go back to their home congregations and teach the adults a thing or two about covenant and collegiality. I have spent the past 3 years serving as a co-facilitator for the young adults group at the congregation that I was last a part of. Being a UU young adult is one of the most uncomfortable liminal spaces to occupy. After the very structured and personalized experience of going through UU religious education, everything leads up to the bridging ceremony, an event that celebrates the completion of one's journey through religious education and their transition to being a young adult. The problem is that after the bridging ceremony, which is often a wonderful, tear-filled experience for many youth, there is nothing that happens. For most congregations that I have been a part of, one of two things usually happens. The youth are expected to muster up their own initiative and join various committees and groups within the congregation, or the congregation is resigned to the fact that the youth are going off to college in a different city or state and will likely never be seen again unless they move back with their new family to settle down and have children of their own. The reality is that UU young adults are left somewhere in the middle, too old to be part of RE and not able to invest themselves into the congregation as they would like because they are in the middle of juggling too much in the way of life, going to school full-time or part-time, working a full-time job or enough part-time jobs to pay rent and other bills, dating and forming relationships, all the while trying to socialize and have some sort of life to keep from being completely overwhelmed. For those congregations that do have a young adults group, they're often unsure of where these young adults fit into the mission and vision of the church. Are they part of children's RE? Are they adult RE? Are they a covenant group or small group ministry? Also, the definition of young adult in the UU world encompasses an age range from 18 to 35 years of age. As someone who is set to turn 35 this year, God help me, I can tell you that there is a lot of life, a lot of growth, and a lot of change that happened from when I was 18 to now. Much more than can be tackled in the span of a young adult group that meets for an hour once a week at the church, if we are even given that. What ends up happening is that, left to their own devices with no mentorship or guidance, many UU young adults struggle to form lasting and meaningful young adult groups, and they often disband and become the self-fulfilling prophecy that the congregation had all along, the ones who move away and do not come back. What they don't see is the fact that many UU young adults who've spent memorable, informative years in UU youth programs end up losing the community that they have been a part of and a connection to the faith tradition that once formed such an integral part of their lives. As author Kate Tweedy Erslev writes in her book, Full Circle, 15 Ways to Grow Lifelong UUs, it is worth staying in touch. Our UU young adults and other young people who are searching for a spiritual home like ours need us. This reality rings even more true than now in a time of pandemic when we are more isolated than ever before. The UUA has, in recent years, begun to see the value and importance of young adult leadership development, offering a youth and young adult office as part of the UUA's Ministries and Faith Development, with specific focuses on emerging young leaders and college and university campus ministry. But if what I have to say holds any weight, I would say that the easiest way to develop and support UU young adults in the congregation can best be achieved by a simple paradigm shift. Youth and young adult ministry must be a necessary part of the focus of any lifespan religious education program. I will say it again. Youth and young adult ministry must be a necessary part of the focus of any lifespan religious education program. Youth and young adults are the future generations of leadership and development for any and all congregations, and they are the ones who will be responsible for carrying the mission and vision of the church forward. They are also the ones, by virtue of the fact that their generation is living through the current events of the day, who will hold the church accountable for how it responds to social justice causes that are important in the world today. They are also the ones who, by virtue of the fact that they are living and working in the community outside of the church's walls, will continue to develop and improve the ways the church continues to support the community it is a part of and partners with those community organizations to make it even better. Most importantly, they are the ones who have a perspective that deserves to be heard and valued. And they also have a lot to say. Maybe it is time for us to do the work of sitting down and listening for a change. May it be so. Blessed be. Amen. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Namaste. Thank you all so much.